we now present For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Will Kenneally. It's been a busy week for us here in Wisconsin, with both the president and vice president making separate trips to both corners of the state, and a major address back here in Madison by Governor Tony Evers. Now, I'll get to all that later in the show, but we'll start this week with that vice presidential visit on Monday. It came as the 51st anniversary of Roe v. Wade, when that decision was handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court. And I want to share with you a little bit from that speech.
After Roe was dismantled, extremists evoked a law from 1849 to stop abortion in this state. 1849, before women could vote, before women could hold elected office, before many women could even own property. In a state whose motto is forward, these extremists are trying to take us backward. Well, we're not having that.
Now, at the same time, back in Madison, that coincided with a committee hearing on a bill that would change abortion restrictions in Wisconsin. Now, later that week, after 3 consecutive session days for the state assembly, it finally passed. And joining us now for more on where this stands is Erin McGroarty, a state government reporter with the Cap Times, who's hopefully a little bit more caffeinated than earlier in the week. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with this hearing first and foremost. What do the bill authors have to say about kind of why they're introducing this bill and why now?
Yeah, essentially what Representative Niedleski said. She's a Republican out of Pleasant Prairie. She said she's tired of campaigning on this issue. She's tired of arguing with her colleagues across the aisle on it. She wants to put it to a vote of the people and kind of have the issue done with. What we heard also throughout the hearing and throughout the session on Thursday is the will of the people. That's a phrase that was used a lot. And I think that this is maybe a way of Republicans trying to achieve the outcome that they want, but being able to really lean back on the fact that this is what they think the people of Wisconsin want.
So the fascinating thing for me is, I'm sure a lot of people at home might think of, the slow movement of government. This was not a slow process, though, this week, right?
No, not at all. A lot of things, as I'm sure you know, in the legislature move at a glacial pace. So this seemed pretty close to warp speed. It was introduced last week. We had a hearing on it Monday. We had an executive session on Tuesday, and then it was on the floor on Thursday, which is incredibly fast for a bill to move. I think that this is a big priority for the Republicans that proposed it. What we also have to keep in mind is that there's been ongoing litigation about abortion access since the days right after Roe was overturned in the summer of 2022. So I think that a lot of the bill co-sponsors here maybe want to achieve legislation before that case, which is anticipated to move up to the Supreme Court, works its way up there. We know that after the last election, that court has a liberal majority, so I think that some of the bill sponsors might be a little concerned about the outcome that they might see if that case makes it there.
Certainly makes sense to, work its way through quickly. Were there any changes that we saw along the way between Monday and Thursday?
Yes, we saw one amendment that was added to the bill on Tuesday during the executive session that would add exemptions in the case of rape or incest, which was not in the original bill.
As you were mentioning before, this kind of takes us all kind of out of the process of the legislature, would put it to final vote of the people. What would that look like?
So this is a little used legislative mechanism. Essentially, if the bill passes the Assembly and the Senate and gets the signature of the governor, which we know is not likely, then it would put a ballot initiative or a ballot referendum on the next ballot in the upcoming election.
And so we heard the governor have his State of the State address this week too, touching on this bill as well. What do we know that he will do with it so far?
He's going to veto it. This is a big point of contention between Democrats and Republicans in the legislature and has been for a long time. A big talking point from the governor throughout his time in office is that he's going to veto anything that he sees as a threat to the reproductive freedom of women in Wisconsin. He talked about it before, he mentioned it directly in his State of the State, and he responded on Thursday to the passing of the bill and is vowed to veto it. So the likelihood of that referendum ending up on the ballot is slim to none, but I think that also what Republicans are hoping to achieve maybe is this is an election year, and so by bringing forward this legislation, voting on it, they're able to show their voting base, hey, if this is an issue that you care about, I care about it too. Even though I'm up against a Democratic governor, I'm trying to achieve something that you want.
So we'll certainly see this play out throughout the rest of the election year.
Absolutely.
Aaron McGroarty, thanks so much for
Thanks for
joining
having
us.
me.
And when we come back, the governor delivered his annual State of the State address this week. UW-Madison professor Mike Wagner breaks down what you need to know from it, plus his major takeaways from President Biden's trip to Superior. We'll be right back after this.
This portion of News 3 Now is sponsored by Madison Gas and Electric.
Spas. The Swim Spa Hot Tub and Sauna Show is coming this weekend only at the arena at the Alliant Energy Center in Madison. Rows and rows of spas, hot tubs, and swim spas. The largest display in the state. Save up to 60% on all in-stock models. This weekend only at the arena at the Alliant Energy Center in Madison.
Come on, Michael, come on. Catch the ball! Huddle up! Do you need to get your eyes checked? Well, actually...
Here's the play. Stanton Optical makes glasses in 30 minutes. It's easy on 3. 1, 2, 3. Easy!
Hut! Come on, Michael, you got this! Come on, turn! Michael, catch! I can see! You did it! I did it!
30-minute glasses? Now that's an easy play. Stanton Optical. Easy's our thing.
At Denver Mattress, comfort comes easy, but peace of mind is a bit tricky. And no, we can't give you a bedside psychoanalyst. Beat it, Sigmund. But you can rest easy knowing every mattress is backed by our 365-night Better Sleep Guarantee. And during the 7-day winter sale, check out the Summit for only $299.99. Or get a $300 gift when you purchase any Tempur-Pedic. Plus 4 years no-interest financing and free shipping. Comfort, peace of mind, and a great night's sleep. Only at Denver Mattress.
When my patients experience very dry skin, I recommend La Roche-Posay Lipicard Body Cream. 1 application a day keeps very dry skin away. La Roche-Posay Lipicard Body Cream provides 48-hour hydration and helps repair the skin barrier. Suitable for ages 2 weeks to 100 years old. La Roche-Posay, recommended by 90,000 dermatologists worldwide.
Spas. The Swim Spa Hot Tub and Sauna Show is coming this weekend only at the arena at the Alliant Energy Center in Madison. Rows and rows of spas, hot tubs, and swim spas. The largest display in the state. Save up to 60% on all in-stock models. This weekend only at the arena at the Alliant Energy Center in Madison.
Welcome back. Wisconsin has been the center of political attention this week. On Tuesday, Governor Evers delivered his annual State of the State address. And that was followed up on Thursday with the president making a stop at Superior, talking about infrastructure. Joining us now for what to take away from those events is UW-Madison professor Mike Wagner. And thanks for joining us.
My pleasure to be here.
So looking at the governor's State of the State address, it's an even number year, so where he doesn't have to worry about running for re-election, nor frankly passing a state budget. What were some of the expectations you had for his speech going into it?
I think it was worth thinking about how the issues the governor talked about were similar to the issues that President Biden and Vice President Harris are discussing, to give the top of the ticket in the upcoming election some runway to kind of discuss issues that are important to Wisconsinites and look for some unanimity across the federal and statewide offices.
So the one thing that kind of stood out to me is we heard the governor call in the legislature a couple of different occasions. I want to play back one of those instances now for you.
I again call on the legislature to address what I believe are the 2 greatest challenges facing our state. The first, our decade-long struggle to retain, attract, and train talented workers to address our state's workforce shortages. Folks, no isn't a workforce plan. Asking more kids to work in the workforce is not a workforce plan. Giving more big breaks to millionaires and billionaires is not a workforce plan.
So the 2 branches have certainly been at odds with each other in recent years. How does it play politically for him to take that stance, kind of calling out the legislature when he's delivering a speech to them in the same chamber as them?
I think it's less about being a speech to the legislature and more about the conversation that happens afterwards, so that voters see the governor saying, I'm trying to do these things, and our partners in the state legislature have no interest in negotiating or debating or engaging. And so I think he's trying to make the case that he's trying to do things the voters of Wisconsin want, and he's trying to make the case that the legislature is not a willing partner.
Yeah, so I also want to touch, as you mentioned before, on abortion. We heard kind of an intense focus on it earlier in the week with the vice president visiting. We also heard the governor touch on that during his address Tuesday. I want to play a quick clip of that as well.
Folks, Wisconsinites have been abundantly clear. As another example, Republicans' last candidate for governor wanted to take those same freedoms and more away. You might notice he's not here delivering the State of the State address tonight. So I want to speak directly to women in Wisconsin tonight. I will veto any bill that takes away your reproductive freedom or makes reproductive health care any less acceptable than it is today, period.
Understanding that we're kind of at a major crossroads here with legislation in the Assembly passing right now on abortion, Supreme Court cases likely going to the Supreme Court on the issue of abortion. How much is this a campaign issue, or is it a governing issue still at this point for the governor to touch on in his speech?
It's certainly a governing issue because of the way that the Democratic governor and Democratic attorney general interpret the state's abortion laws and interpret whether they want to pursue people who violate other people's interpretation of the abortion law in Wisconsin. It's also, though, a huge campaign issue. As I mentioned before, it's one of the top issues for many Wisconsin voters, especially those who are persuadable. And those who are persuadable tend to be movable in the direction of the Democrats' position on that issue. And so we should expect them to talk about this issue early and often in 2024.
So we also heard some concrete steps that the governor took, creating some task forces. Perhaps the most notable was allowing Wisconsinites on Medicaid essentially to have a standing prescription for over-the-counter contraceptives. So when Wisconsinites hear the speech, do those kind of concrete actions that he can say, I'm making this executive order, do those resonate with the voters who are listening?
They resonate with some of the voters, especially those who think that government has the potential to be an instrument of good or has the potential to make people's lives a little bit better. And so when he's talking about things he's tried to do with the legislature that haven't gone well, or things he's done as executive that circumvents the legislature, he's trying to make the case that government can be an instrument of good, of fulfilling the popular will, as is the case with, say, the contraceptive issue that you're talking about. And he's making the argument that he's trying to be responsive to what a majority of Wisconsinites say they want, and he's trying to lay blame at the feet of the Republican legislature.
I want to turn to the president's visit. He's up in Superior talking about funding for a bridge. Kind of these bringing home the bacon moments, especially at the federal level. Are those important moments for politicians, especially now in January when they might be running in November?
President Biden's had a difficult time breaking through and persuading people that the economy is getting better, that infrastructure is improving. And so making visits like the one he made give him an opportunity to try to break through and persuade Wisconsinites that promises he's made are promises that are being kept with respect to infrastructure, with respect to the growing economy, with respect to inflation slowing down a bit. These are all things that he's had a hard time persuading people are happening, even though they are. And so visits are one way to do that, especially for somebody like former President Biden, who, has been in federal politics since the 1970s, which was an era of bringing home the bacon, so to speak, and doing things that were affirmative representation in specific areas where we're bringing back a bridge or a post office or road dollars or those sorts of things. And so doing kind of old school politics to say, we heard your concerns and we're delivering on them is something he's trying to do in states like Wisconsin.
Wise insight, Professor Wagner. Thanks. We really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Now, when we come back, a breakdown of the Republican tax proposals and how that could change the state's economy. We'll be right back after this.
So I'm not sure I could even talk about this, but U.S. Cellular has a new deal where you can get any phone for free. Seriously, wow.
My business sense says that's a great deal.
You're so right. That's a totally awesome deal.
Get any phone free when you switch.
Are record energy costs putting a squeeze on your fixed or limited incomes? With inflation rising at record levels and incomes not keeping pace, you might be one of tens of thousands of Wisconsin residents who are struggling to survive in the blistering heat of summer or the bitter cold of winter. While you haven't asked for it, the Keep Wisconsin Warm Cool Fund and your local energy assistance providers are here to help. No Wisconsin resident should ever have to face the challenge of living without heat or power or face homelessness. For a hand up, apply today and call 1-800-506-5596. That's 800-506-5596. Or visit www.kwwf.org.
Insurance. It isn't the most exciting thing to talk about, but it is incredibly important. Make sure you protect yourself and your loved ones by having enough insurance, including uninsured and underinsured coverage. At Gruber Law Offices, we see the importance of this every single day. We've helped tens of thousands of Wisconsin families just like yours. Gruber Law Offices, one call, that's all.
So I'm not sure I could even talk about this, but U.S. Cellular has a new deal where you can get any phone for free. Seriously, wow.
My business sense says that's a great deal.
You're so right. That's a totally awesome deal.
Get any phone free when you switch.
Welcome back. This week, Republicans rolled out a new tax proposal that makes sweeping changes to the state's tax code. It rearranges the state's tax brackets. Instead of lumping people making between $28,000 and $315,000 in one bracket, moving anyone making less than $112,000, moving them to a lower bracket. Now, the plan would also include tax breaks for parents and retirees in Wisconsin. But what kind of impact will these tax cuts have for Wisconsinites and the Wisconsin economy? Joining us now is Anant Seshadri, co-director of the Center for Research on the Wisconsin Economy at UW-Madison. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so first I want to kind of break apart some of these groups. Looking at the retirees, what would it mean for the state's economy to attract some of those groups?
And so at some level, you want to step back and look at what the impact of tax reform is going to be, and why retirees potentially were targeted. So retirees are kind of an interesting group because at a fundamental level, they don't draw on very much in terms of state public subsidies because a lot of what they need is provided for by the federal government. And so they're an attractive group to try and retain in the state of Wisconsin and attract to the state of Wisconsin. So I suspect that this proposal will have an impact, will make a dent in terms of trying to attract and retain retirees in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, so you think of retirees, they have a lot to factor into. One of the analogies that they're using is choosing between Wisconsin and Florida. So you obviously have maybe the tax code, also the weather, some of those other quality of life issues. How much does some of those tax breaks impact somebody when they're thinking about where to resettle, for example?
Sure. When you look at migration decisions, right, it's not an easy economic question to kind of study, but recently people have looked at one kind of clean, stark example, which is the state of California. That raised tax rates fairly substantially over the last decade or so. And you actually saw significant outmigration from the state of California to lower tax states, right? So this is not just retirees, these are workers. And so that's one clean example where substantial increases in tax rates actually led to outmigration from the state to another state.
And I'm fascinated too, one of the other groups that was pulled out were these parents, giving them tax cuts, essentially allowing more child care costs to be deducted from this federal qualifying list, essentially. Sure. Are parents another one of those groups that are kind of specifically important to economic driving?
So married couples especially sound like a very interesting group to me for the following reason. When you go around the state, you hear a lot about the labor force shortage in the state of Wisconsin. And one group that's being targeted by this tax reform is our married women, right? So that you have, and if you think about what might be an inhibiting factor from more women working in the labor force, I would think of two things. One is potentially the marriage tax penalty, and the other is the cost of childcare, which right now it's actually about 30% more expensive than UW-Madison tuition. And so the two provisions in this bill would, to some degree, alleviate both the marriage tax penalty and the child care credit. And my understanding is that the marriage tax credit existed for a long period of time in the state of Wisconsin, and all this bill does is adjust for inflation over the last 15 to 20 years or so.
That's a good point, too, because part of this bill would be to give that tax break specifically to married couples as well. So with these changes to the tax bracket, what I was mentioning before, that like 28 to more than 300,000 a single filer income, that seems to be a huge bracket for a person who's not necessarily an economic policy expert like myself. Does that compare? Is that comparable to how other states kind of arrange their local income taxes?
So it's interesting to compare Wisconsin's degree of progressivity of tax structure with other states. If you look over the last 2 decades or so, in the state of Wisconsin, our degree of progressivity, so one way to look at this is to look at what happens to the top bracket vis-a-vis the bottom bracket, and our rate of progressivity defined by, say the top bracket minus the bottom bracket tax rate has doubled by a little more than, has more than doubled. So it's gone from like 2 percentage points to almost like 4.15 percentage points. And so what this means is our tax structure has become more progressive. States around us, and most of the states in America have actually reduced their degree of progressivity and moved slowly to a flatter tax structure. All right. And so it's also interesting if you compare the retiree tax credit with some of our neighbors like Illinois and Iowa that exempt retiree income taxes. So at some level, it's not just trying to get the economic incentives right, but also trying to make sure that we compete with other states in order to make sure that we can attract and retain and provide the right incentives for people to work, save, and live here.
So that issue of progressivity, that's kind of fascinating to me too. Does that compare to the federal income tax, for example? You think of that as being generally rather progressive?
Yes. So the federal income tax structure is progressive. And one can debate the merits of whether or not a progressive tax structure is efficient. What a progressive tax structure seeks to do are 2 things, which is inherently what a state government tries to do, right? A state essentially tries to collect resources, collects tax revenue in the most efficient way possible. And then it attempts to provide insurance for individuals who are not so fortunate, right? By taxing the rich and giving it to the poor, taxing, let's say, the lucky and giving it to the not so lucky. And the progressive tax structure attempts to do both with one blunt instrument. And so this is potentially the reason why a lot of states have moved away from a progressive tax structure to a flat tax structure, because it has a little bit better economic incentives.
One of the other things that we talk about is this idea of the state surplus, kind of one-time money that the state has collected more than it has dispersed. It's sitting at about $4 billion for the state of Wisconsin, and part of the political efforts would be to spend down that budget surplus with these tax breaks. But that's not necessarily, that'll exist for just this budget cycle. It won't exist much beyond that. Some of these tax breaks might be permanent. Is there a sustainability issue when we start giving some of these tax breaks back that would, sacrifice taking back in some of that revenue?
Sure, that's a good question to ask. It's not shocking that most states contemplate tax reform when at a time when the economy has a lot of surplus. So which is the reason why I think Wisconsin is contemplating a major tax reform at a time like this. There is no question that in the longer run, and the Legislative Fiscal Bureau has some numbers on what the impact will be of this tax change on effectively state government resources, tax collections, right? But I think that's not necessarily the only metric or necessarily the right metric to look at, because at the end of the day, we want to know whether this tax change, in fact, how does it influence standards of living? How does it influence consumption, GDP, and so on? And when you think about states' economy, it's not just government outlays, but it's also private consumption and investment. So if it's the case that the tax reform ends up increasing GDP, increasing consumption and investment by more than the state government expenditure goes down, then it's on net, on balance, it's a good thing for the state.
Okay, can I ask you then, peer into your crystal ball a little bit? It's easy, I think, to kind of, dollars and cents it a little bit. For some of those other characteristics, some of those other factors, do you have a sense of how these might impact that?
So this is something we are working on. We'll probably release a report sometime next week. But our early estimates suggest that the Legislative Fiscal Bureau does a static analysis where they conclude that in the longer run, this bill will reduce government expenditures by about $1.4 billion. So these are the 4 different components: the middle class tax credit, middle class tax cut, the retiree income tax cut, and then the 2 provisions for the marriage credit and then the child care credit. So all told, that's about $1.4 billion. So our best estimate at this point in time, and we'll fine-tune that over the next few days or so, is that when you move from the economy we're in right now and you make the changes that are in the bill, it would increase Wisconsin state GDP by at least $2.5 billion.
Wow, so net positive.
A net
anyway.
positive.
Fascinating. Yeah, Professor Sastry, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be right back after this.
Nice shirt.
Oh, thanks.
And those kicks.
Yeah, I got all this at the Salvation Army.
Wait, there's one here in town?
Yeah, I'll take you.
I'm in.
You're gonna love it.
All right. That's it? Brand new?
Now's your chance to save big on brand name clothes, the latest housewares, and brand new shoes.
Running shoes. Air fryers too?
The grand opening of the Salvation Army in Madison, February 2nd from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m.
A logo can do more than identify your company. It can connect in meaningful ways, energize your team, and inspire your customers. We're 4imprint, and we know your logo on the right product can create moments that matter. With 30 years of experience and thousands of products to choose from, we guarantee your order will be right the first time, on time, and for a great price. Be certain that the right moments will matter. Explore thousands of promotional products at 4imprint.com.
4imprint, for certain.
Choosing a treatment for your chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more, can be overwhelming. So ask your doctor about Botox. Botox prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine before they even start. It's the #1 prescribed branded chronic migraine treatment. So far, more than 5 million Botox treatments have been given to over 850,000 chronic migraine patients.
Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
In a survey, 92% of current users said they wish they talked to their doctor and started Botox sooner. So ask your doctor if Botox is right for you. Learn how AbbVie could help you save on Botox.
Welcome back. We end this morning with a notable departure in the state legislature. Longtime State Senator Lena Taylor was appointed to an opening on the Milwaukee County Circuit Court. Now, she served in the state capitol for 2 decades, including a time on the state's powerful budget-writing Joint Finance Committee. In a statement announcing her departure, Taylor wrote that it feels like a full circle moment. I began my career as a public defender and then as a private practice attorney. The goal of justice reform has always been a priority. Now, the governor will declare a special election to fill her Milwaukee area seat to come. That does it for us this week. I'm Will Kenneally. Have a great rest of your weekend.
This has been For the Record.